welcome back to Everything Marketplaces, where we talk with marketplace founders and leaders from some of today's top marketplaces. So this is episode 23, and I'm excited to welcome on Chris Bakke, who has some incredible marketplace experience and has been part of 3 exits to companies like Indeed, Zillow, and Knotel. So to top that off, Chris is also an advisor to Y Combinator, and it's definitely not every day that we have a chance to chat with someone who has the experience that Chris does with marketplaces. So I can't wait to dive into more with Chris. So Chris, I mean, you have quite the background, but before we jump into that, let's maybe start off by you sharing more about yourself and how you first got into marketplaces for those that don't know you.
Yeah, for sure. Nice to meet you all. I'm Chris, based out of the Bay Area. So I've been doing marketplaces for I guess like 9 years or so. Kind of got into it accidentally. Was working in private equity briefly, and it was like 10, 11 years ago, and I really hated it. And so that was down in Los Angeles, and so I moved up to the Bay Area about 10 years ago, and joined as an early employee at a company here in San Francisco that was in the residential real estate space. And so what we were doing was effectively helping, and this is, coming out of the last recessions. This is like 2009, 2010. We were helping real estate agents and brokers basically figure out how to start property management businesses and get all of their listings online. And then kind of through that, we realized, great, if we can get all of these brokers in New York and Miami and Boston and Chicago and San Francisco, some of these big, rental markets, to list, all of their properties for rent through us, then there is this kind of like rental marketplace that we could actually build out and serve both sides of that market. If we're getting a lot of the supply side, if we can drive demand to that, then that becomes interesting. So as a startup, we started doing this in like 2011, 2012. In middle of 2012, we sold to Zillow, and so this is like right when Zillow was going public. So I became the head of biz dev at Zillow, was mostly focused on new ventures. So this is like 2012, 2013. And we built out about 5 new marketplaces on top of Zillow right after going public. So Zillow Rentals, Zillow Digs, which is a like home improvement and interior design product, Zillow Mortgages, a good way to connect with a mortgage broker. So we basically just like, we were kind of just like copy pasting the early stuff that Zillow did just around home shopping to all of these other verticals that, were happening in the home buying process. We were even at, around that time, we were exploring these kind of like secondary marketplaces through the site around kind of like lead gen and connecting people. Like we found that, people who buy a new house within 6 months, the likelihood that they will also buy a new car is very high. And so we even explored partnerships around, can we get home buyers and basically create like, marketplaces or partnerships and actually get them to go buy cars through us. And so it was kind of a creative time in the company, even though it was kind of an early stage publicly traded company. There were about 500 employees there. I left in I think the end of 2013 to join as COO of a startup called 42 Floors that was in the commercial real estate space. And the goal there was really to become kind of like the Zillow of commercial real estate. I stayed there for about 1.5 years and then wanted to start my own thing. And so in 2015, I left with a couple of other early employees from the company 42 Floors, and we went off and we started a company called Interviewed. So I'd spent like 6 years in real estate technology and marketplaces, and then moved over into talent and hiring and HR tech. And so Interviewed was a site that allowed companies to hire lots and lots of non-technical entry-level people at scale. And so we were really riding the wave in 2015, 2016 of, I think a lot of US-based companies really doubling down, tripling down on outsourced support. Like Lyft, Uber were all preparing to go public. So we had both of them as clients. We also had a lot of big clients like IBM and Fidelity who were had US support teams, US customer support teams for a long time. and we're outsourcing to Latin America or to the Philippines. And so that was not a marketplace. That was kind of traditional B2B SaaS. And we built that business to about $2 million in ARR within the first 2 years with founder-led sales. Eventually got revenue up much higher than that, became profitable. And then in mid 2017 sold to Indeed, which is a marketplace, and then kind of ran the entire strategy over again of integrating a B2B SaaS application and team into this giant marketplace. So I then became head of enterprise product at Indeed. So Indeed, for those of you who don't know, is a job board. We have about 11,000 employees. It's about $5 billion in revenue across about 60 countries. So this was kind of operating at massive scale. Zillow, when I was there, was really only focused on US. This is the first time in my career that I've dealt with stuff like internationalization and localization and a lot of like fraud and everything that comes with kind of a large marketplace at scale. But was also developing a lot of kind of new tools for both sides of that marketplace. So better ways for candidates to actually, kind of prove themselves and vet their skills through assessments, through video interviews, all kind of made free on the platform to employers. And then also better tools and better products for employers to ultimately find candidates. So I was there from the middle of 2017 until about 2 months ago, and just left 2 months ago, and have started a new company called Lasky with my old co-founder from Interviewed, who I've worked with for now about 7 or 8 years. And so Lasky is a company that is, it's a holding company, but our first product is dedicated to helping small teams go from zero to the first couple $1 million in sales. And so there's a kind of tools plus advisory offering that we'll be coming out with later this fall.
Awesome. I mean, wow, that's some incredible experience. So I actually want to kind of go back maybe to the first company that you started or you're a part of in the Zillow acquisition. So could you maybe share more about kind of, what stage you were at, maybe a little bit more about that acquisition and then what that transition was like from a smaller marketplace into a larger org?
Yeah. So the company was called RentJuice, which is not a great name, but it is what it is. It was created out of this like kind of college project in 2009. So at RentJuice, the business, it was still like relatively early stage when it was acquired. So we had raised a little over 5 million for it across 2 rounds, and these rounds were like, for those of you who were operating companies or running your own companies 10 years ago, I mean, these are like kind of very traditional, a decade ago rounds. So you're talking like $1 million seed, $4 million Series A. These are not like massive rounds, and so we were basically approaching Series B territory, which probably for us would have been $7 or $8 million raised at the time. But the businesses had raised about $5 million. We exited to Zillow for $45 million, and all told, it was about like 4 years exactly, beginning to end. And I was there for the last few years of that. And so the business it was a challenge, honestly, like from a sales perspective. I think I learned a lot about pricing. It's one of the reasons that I'm obsessed with pricing today. So RentJuice was, like I said, in the beginning, it was not, a marketplace. We kind of transformed it into a marketplace toward the end. But in the beginning, we were really focused on the, real estate, supply side of getting brokers and getting them to upload their listings onto our platform, because they weren't, there was no other place at the time to manage these. And so that kind of transformed into how do we make this thing bigger? But in the process, we were selling this database, or these tools that we were offering to real estate agents and brokers to upload their listings for, at the low end, $79 a month. And at the high end, I think it was like either $149 or $159 per month. And that's a really tough way to scale if you don't have like viral loops and some sort of some sort of flywheel to actually like drive that. And so that was my first experience. That was like at first just kind of doing whatever it took, like cold calling these brokers, getting them to purchase this. And we were also in kind of a highly competitive market, and so there was this like pricing dynamic where we were undercutting a bunch of other people in the market because we were venture backed and they were bootstrapping stuff. And so there was this whole kind of odd dynamic of for the the first startup that I ever worked at. I think A, having a pricing point that was way too low, and B, being in this highly competitive market, and both of those things suck. And so I'm fairly obsessed with pricing now because it's a very hard way to make a living. I think we got extremely lucky with the exit that we had. I mean, all businesses that exit are lucky, but this was particularly crazy. Like we had, I mean, this is all like kind of public info now, but I think at the time we sold, we had $550,000 in annual recurring revenue. We sold the business for $45 million, right? Like these exits don't typically happen. And so there were a lot of aspects of the future promise of building out, that rental marketplace for Zillow, that ultimately went super well. Zillow Rentals is a massive business today, but they certainly took a big gamble on us. And so in the meantime, selling tools and selling selling a database to real estate agents for $79 a month with an inside sales team is a challenge. And so that's why I think we got excited about the idea of a marketplace. If we could actually control, in our case, control unique supply, where this has been a thing, for those of you that are either working in real estate marketplaces or have worked at them or are thinking about running them, it really is a battle over unique inventory in a lot of cases. And so we were hyper focused on these 5 or 6 markets, right? Like Boston, Miami, Chicago, New York, San Francisco, and a couple markets in Texas, that you just saw a lot of transactions. And also, I think we had spent many years building those relationships with brokers, and we were getting, unique listings that they weren't posting anywhere else. And these were certainly in the days where like Craigslist was definitively like the leading place, where you would go and find rentals. And so if we were getting listings in New York that were not going on Craigslist, like that's super valuable to somebody. And so ultimately the value of enough of those hundreds and then thousands and then tens of thousands of those unique listings where, the promise was, we can find you a tenant, we can find you a renter for those listings. Don't go to Craigslist, don't go post this anywhere else. That's a hard thing. But I think if you offer free tools, if you're offering a lot of kind of freemium offerings on the back end, it becomes easier to get some of those, proprietary listings in our case, or for any marketplace, proprietary content on the supply side is super valuable to driving demand.
Nice. Thanks for sharing more on that. So, so you did mention that you guys launched multiple kind of marketplaces within Zillow while you were there. So could you maybe kind of speak to some of maybe the decision making around that and how you would approach these kind of new marketplaces and launch those?
Yeah, I think for us, I mean, there was no, again, my role at Zillow was leading, a lot of these kind of like new ventures on the business development side. There didn't seem to be any particular, rhyme nor reason around strategy outside of the obvious, which is like just follow the path of a home buyer. And so, if somebody is starting on Zillow and they're looking at a bunch of homes, well, eventually they're going to need to like buy that home and actually close on it and furnish it and design it and remodel it and like kind of go down that path. And so I think for us in real estate, and this is 7 years ago, there was a fairly obvious path there. I think with a lot of other businesses, I've been, like I said, a part of a big hiring marketplace. You can kind of follow the path of a candidate. So for us at Indeed, it was, you're shopping for jobs and you are now trying to apply to those jobs. You're trying to look really good to employers. And so we're offering stuff like video interviews. And so, really it was, these were, even building these on top of Zillow, these were like really hard marketplaces to launch though. I mean, I think, using mortgages as an example, I think, Zillow was founded, I think in 2005. We were starting Zillow Mortgages 8 years later in 2013. And it was an uphill battle. I mean, Zillow had spent 8 years getting the supply and the demand and a lot of attention and press and I think recognition for the fact that we can help you buy a home. But we were very far from a trusted source for renting a home or for actually like connecting with a mortgage broker. And so there were loads of sites that had been around for 15 plus years at that time who had already built kind of the recognition and the credibility. And so it was interesting. I mean, it was a challenge of for us on like the rental side, for example, companies like apartments.com and forrent.com and CoStar and LoopNet, like these companies had been around for a decade plus, just getting really good at rentals. And so for us being this, home buying kind of cutesy site that had like a Zestimate and could estimate, the value of your home, trying to get really serious about rentals was really hard. And that's why, that's one of the first places where I realized like, damn, marketplaces are no joke. We're doing this at a public company. We have, a lot of resources and, hundreds of employees at that point. And it's still hard. And so, for us, we ended up, for us on mostly on, the mortgage side and the rental side, we ended up going very kind of strategic and going more top down. For us, that just it made a lot more sense. In real estate, you have these giant pools of, Greystar at the time, I think ran it was a giant real estate investment trust, and they ran like 550,000 apartment homes. And so we could spend years, right, going after like the Craigslist strategy of getting individual homes, individual condos, individual units, or we could just go to the top. And I think that was much easier to facilitate when you're already at a big company and you can leverage, the Zillow name. At a startup, obviously that's exponentially more challenging. And so there's, I think, a lot of advantages to going after that long tail first that, the big players in your category don't care about. But for us, it was just like get as many listings on the site as fast as possible, build credibility that we actually have, supply here. And the best way to do that was spend, a year in 2013 and into 2014, basically, solely focused on, in the rentals case, the top 100 landlords in the country. And then we figured once you get those listings, it becomes a lot easier for, individual mom and pop landlords to post their listings on Zillow, which is not necessarily true, by the way, but that was the kind of thesis back then.
Nice. Thanks for sharing more on that. So I definitely I didn't want to spend too much time talking about Zillow because I know you have quite a bit of experience after that. So kind of jumping into 42 floors, could you maybe speak to that kind of transition into more of the commercial market and and then from there even a segue into Interviewed?
Yeah. So 42 floors. Again, as a recap, was really going after the Airbnb or Zillow for commercial real estate. And so I was not one of the founders. Joined as a very early employee there. So they had this like very I would say like huge launch back in 2012, about a year before I joined, where they had a very funny structure. Like there were like 8 co-founders to the business. They had raised, by the time that I joined as employee, like literally number like 2 outside of the co-founding team, they had already raised like $20 million, basically like all in the first year. They raised like a seed, they raised a $7 million A, and then like a $12 million Series B, all like spaced like 5 to 6 months apart. And so the challenge there was an interesting one, whereas like an operator, I had come off of this, Zillow experience and effectively was brought in to say, awesome, we have a team now of 10 people or whatever it was, and we have $20 million in the bank. How do we make money? And so that was just a lot of like trial and error. So some of the first things that we did, I mean, every business, every marketplace has its challenges. Again, in this particular one, the challenge for us was that this business, 42 Floors, had started in San Francisco in 2012 to 2013. And again, for those of you who were working out or running companies in 2013, at least in San Francisco, it was a crazy frothy time, right? We go through these like kind of peaks and valleys in terms of funding. And so 2013, 2014 was like, it kind of felt like how it is today, at least for like really hot like VC backed startups in San Francisco, where things are just getting crazy from a valuation perspective. So lots and lots of pre-revenue companies were coming out of Y Combinator and out of 500 startups and Techstars and various accelerators with millions of dollars pre-revenue with small teams, and they were all looking for very cool offices to attract better talent and to convince people from Facebook and Google to jump over. And so there was this actually crazy amount of inbound leads that 42 Floors was getting. And we had a challenge that was we basically wanted to serve the other side of that marketplace with brokers, but no brokers want to work with small leads, right? So it was this kind of wild dynamic of, for a lot of marketplaces, supply or demand side is always, exponentially harder than the other. And often that's, it's easy to get supply and it's really hard to drive demand to that supply. But for us, this was like completely inverted. We had, I don't remember the exact numbers, but I mean, on a monthly basis, as a relatively small team, we had thousands of inbound requests, just primarily in San Francisco, from startups mostly, but also more traditional businesses like small law firms and accounting firms that were looking for office space. And in real estate, there's all sorts of regulations around who's actually able to show that space. So we as like engineers and salespeople couldn't just go around the city and unlock doors for people, and so we had to find brokers who would do that. And there's kind of there's actually multiple sides on the supply side of real estate, right? You have like the landlord who has the building, you have an agent who's representing that landlord, and then traditionally you have a tenant rep broker who's representing the tenant. And so you're not coordinating with a single person, you're not coordinating with like a home buyer, you're coordinating with like a whole set of people. And with small spaces, this is really tricky because landlords know that they're popular, so they don't want to make concessions. Brokers generally don't care about them. I mean, if you think about, this is something that I always think about with marketplaces, like if you're serving a like service-based, commission-based industry, you're building an insurance marketplace or a real estate marketplace. The people that are serving those leads on the other side, it's an hour and a half of their time to go and unlock the door for a 300 square foot space. And it's an hour and a half of their time to go unlock the door for a 300,000 square foot space. So all brokers, everybody serving those types of like, commission only deals are naturally incentivized to go whale hunting. And so if your marketplace is servicing the long tail, which most marketplaces are, at least in the first few years, it's really hard to get that right. And so we tried to fix this through a number of things. We introduced a round robin system for leads, where we were like hustling, going around the city, meeting every person basically that got their real estate license within the last 12 months. We wanted to meet, and this is like publicly accessible. And the thesis was, if you've just gotten your real estate license, you're starting from nowhere, and we can help you by sending you a bunch of leads, and you'll be our person who like goes around the city and unlocks doors for us. And so we tried this. It worked, I think, medium well. We got, I think, 20 brokers who had all been licensed for under a couple of years onto the platform, and we basically round robin leads. So every day, dozens of leads would come in. We were not doing a great job at lead qualification, and this became a problem later on, but we would basically take a lead. Hey, I want to, I just got funded. I want 1,500 square feet for a few of us in, this part of San Francisco. And then that lead would go, at the time, 6 or 7 years ago, via text message through like a daisy chain of brokers. And then the first broker to, say okay on the SMS would basically stop the chain. They would then be sent, a text message with, the person's information who wants the space. They would call the person, and then they would kind of meet up, and we would just do matchmaking that way. So there was no apps. We never built anything like mobile. This was all done through like SMS. And then, we were kind of connecting, I think through like Twilio numbers, where we were like proxying it on both sides, where, tenants could then text that broker or call them directly once they got connected. And then, yeah, eventually we moved into a vertically integrated offering, which is amazing in some ways, really challenging in others. Our revenue in San Francisco basically went from I think tens of thousands of dollars per month connecting leads to these first 20 brokers to like $2 million annually. So we went from a few $1,000s a month to like $200,000 a month, because we started actually like serving these deals internally, hiring our own brokers, and then like facilitating them closing the lease and getting paid when we would close the lease. But I think 42 Floors was ultimately it was a tale in, I think, number one, over raising. It's a really bad idea to raise $20 million before you have revenue, even if you can get it. And so the expectations at the point that you were going for like Series C, Series D, like growth stage rounds, nobody cares about $2 million a year. They want to see $10 million, $15 million per year. And that's really hard to do. And then the second thing there is, I think as a team, we spent money just like crazy. Like we were trying to aggressively get to these goals, and so we overhired. We hired the wrong people. We tried too many experiments at once. At 42 Floors, it's you're having to get your own listings. You're having to drive your own demand of tenants who want to see those listings. And now we were kind of competing by building a brokerage internally. We were competing with the very people who we were, asking for their listings. We were going out and competing with them on deals. So it's, real estate, really hard business. But we tried to take one of the lessons that we learned from this business. There was ultimately kind of a turnaround story, by the way, that I can tell. But so at the time in February of 2015, I started to get very excited about starting my own company and kind of doing this in a better way, a more capital efficient way. And so I left with two other early employees who were also both engineers, and we started Interviewed. And Interviewed was really about fixing a lot of the hiring mistakes that we had made at 42 Floors. We hired people largely on culture fit, not on their skills. And so we wanted to build an entire company that was very like thesis driven around skills-based hiring. So ultimately, when around the time that we left, 42 Floors laid off about 50% of their workforce. They shifted models around quite a bit. They continued to really drive like supply and demand on the marketplace side. They kind of doubled down and got more serious about data and selling that data to large companies around like real estate trends. It was a good outcome. They 42 Floors exited to Knotel, which is kind of a secondary like WeWork competitor. They've raised several $100 million and are trying to run a more capital efficient version of WeWork. And at that time though, we were already about a year into running Interviewed. And so yeah.
Nice. So you've had quite a bit of learnings along the way, and so with all of that, could you maybe share a little bit more about Interviewed and your kind of what the early days of that were like, and then we can kind of like fast track through to the acquisition with that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so again, Interviewed, a little bit different path, B2B SaaS company. We did a few marketplace experiments there, but ultimately the business was, we noticed that every company, just to a certain extent, when they started hiring entry-level salespeople, entry-level customer support, entry-level data entry, financial analysts, didn't really matter what the role was, pretty much anything with under 5 or 10 years of experience in a non-technical role. Most of these businesses, both traditional businesses as well as startups, were doing some sort of exercise or some sort of some sort of like case study style interview, right? Like if you're hiring a salesperson who's more junior, you want a really good sense of, can this person, is this person good on the phone? Can they qualify a lead? Are they willing to do cold calls? Do they write high quality emails, or do their emails suck? And so, all these businesses do all these kind of crazy things manually to vet that. And that could be, doing a sample sales pitch over the phone, or, increasingly 5 years ago, people would do some sort of like, WebEx or Zoom like demo, and they would ask a sales candidate to come in and like demo the rest of the sales team or the executive team or the recruiters or whatever. And so there were all of these like kind of challenges around doing that at scale. And so that process works super well if you are a 10 person, 50 person, 100 person company and you're hiring a couple sales reps per year. One of the reasons that I started this company was because I read a stat right before we started that Wells Fargo gets 2.4 million job applications every year. They hire about 20 or 30,000 people. So, doing a cute little like Zoom style interview works great, again, if you're hiring low numbers of people. If you have to sort through 2.5 million applications and find the tens of thousands that you're going to hire, you need automation. And so we got, I think, pretty good about really helping companies deal with these like massive top of funnel challenges around, if this person for a US based role, if they can't, it's a chat support role. And so we really, really, really need a high level of English written proficiency. And so if the candidate doesn't have that, nothing else matters. We don't need to talk to them. We don't care about their experience. Like, sorry, this isn't going to work. And so how do you do that in a super candidate friendly and engaging way? I think increasingly one of the challenges with, the Walmarts and Wells Fargos and Chases of the world is collectively, Amazon's getting, I think, 4 million applications per year. They'll hire about 300,000 people. Wells Fargo, 2.5 million applications per year. A lot of these applicants are also customers. And so the other challenge that we were solving was, if you are not hiring millions of people every year who are applying to your jobs and you're giving them a shit candidate experience, those people are like statistically less likely to like bank with Wells Fargo or buy shit on Amazon. And so it became this entire process of how do we actually ensure a good candidate experience outside of for the employer, how do we help them like get the right person? But how do you do this in a way that like the recruiters don't have time to sift through millions of resumes? And they also certainly don't have time to get back to candidates. And so there was a lot of like automation, in multiple directions there, from the employer to the candidate, from the candidate to the employer, giving candidates an out at various points in the process, saying like, hey, this job isn't a good fit for me. And that's right when we were starting to explore this marketplace idea that is super interesting in hiring, which is like, look, if you have a single customer as a B2B SaaS company like Wells Fargo, who is dropping 2.35 whatever it is million people on the floor and not hiring them, those 3 million people will go get jobs somewhere else. It's just a matter of helping them find the right job. And so they're within a couple of very specific roles that we were doing. We started some marketplace experiments in 2017 around, we knew Weebly was one of our customers, IBM was one of our customers, and Weebly and IBM were like really obsessed with chat support. Fidelity Investments was one of our customers, and they were really obsessed with phone support. Uber and Lyft were one of our customers, and they were obsessed with email support. So even if you take a very narrow role like customer support and you get really good at hiring for it, you can very easily build a marketplace if you start with kind of B2B SaaS offering on the back end that says, if Fidelity cares a lot about phone support and somebody did a terrible job on the English verbal communication section of the assessment, but they have amazing writing skills, let's go get them a job at Uber, let's go get them a job at Weebly. And so once you deeply understand, at least in hiring, once you deeply understand the needs of your customers and like very specifically what they want and what they're hiring for, the matching piece becomes really easy. And the nature of running a B2B SaaS company is that you have all of these buyers that are buying, paying for your monthly service or your annual service to help them screen candidates. And so you kind of have customers built into this. And so we started to experiment this. It was going super well. And then, ultimately in the middle of 2017, it was like, in order to do this, I think we need a lot more money, because this is like a media, we were a few $1 million in revenue. We were 2.5 years old. We were profitable with a small team. Things were awesome. But in order to like really build out this marketplace, it was going to be tough. For us, as a first-time founder at the time, had run 2 other companies super early on, but as a first-time founder with Interviewed, I wanted to win under the belt, and so we decided to sell. So we sold the business for high 8 figures to Indeed, and then ultimately facilitated all that marketplace stuff that we were going to build on our own through a company that was already doing 250 million candidates per month. And so that ended up being kind of a very good way for us to plug something that was kind of working at a small scale and just blow it up overnight. And so the numbers there were like, we were processing on the SaaS side, we were doing about 1 million candidates per year in 2017 was kind of our run rate when we sold. I think last year we did 160 million candidates through Interviewed. So, every acquisition is different, but this was a very good way to like take something that was kind of working, prove that to a big, a big company that was already doing this at scale, and say, hey, we know something that you don't. We've gotten very good on the back end about doing this like very niche thing that we can now go apply to salespeople and financial analysts and all these other roles, and help you do that and apply that to all of the customers that you already have. So, I think that there's certainly an opportunity within hiring to like go and compete with Indeed, go and compete with LinkedIn. Like these sites are not great in a lot of ways, but Indeed was an amazing business. It's a fascinating business. It's a wildly profitable business. It does about $400 million in profit per year. So it's a crazy opportunity to kind of learn how like the experts do this really well. And then hopefully, in the next step that we go do, apply some of these lessons.
Nice. Yeah, I know the hiring space is definitely a huge opportunity. I was actually briefly in it myself at the same time you were in with Interviewed. So definitely was, you guys are on the radar too. And I think we have quite a few in the group. So we're going to jump right into questions, I think, here in a little bit, because I have some DMs from people with some questions. But I definitely want to come back and ask you about founder-led sales. I'll probably jump in kind of in the middle of that. But hey, Rich, did you want to come on?
Yeah. Hey, Chris. It was actually the kind of question I actually was going to ask was, it seems like you're an expert operations and sales guy, and you've been, had many challenges in your career where you've been told, you have to like do a massive sales outreach, or here's some massive targets. How do you sit down at the beginning of these kind of like big projects with Zillow and 42 floors and say, how are we going to go after a massive amount of sales in a short amount of time?
Yeah, I think, I think the big thing with virtually all marketplaces is, or I think this applies to any business, is like, at different points in my career, I've had different resources. So I think some of this is looking at the resources that you have. I Interviewed, it was just me. Like my other 2 co-founders, they were off building software. We hadn't hired employees yet. And so, sales can be on one person individually as a founder. Zillow was kind of like a medium case where we had like a handful of sales reps, and it was like, kind of how do we do this with a couple of people? Indeed, very different story. We had several thousand sales reps, and many of them had gotten very good at the enterprise stuff. So some of this, obviously, I assume everybody here is like, much earlier stage. So I think as a founder, the best advice that I have is like, you have to start somewhere. I think that there's a sense of like overwhelming fear that you can get when you look at like all of the opportunities in the market. And so, like I said, I think like with Zillow as an example, even though we had a lot of resources and we had money, there was no particular rhyme nor reason. It was just like, start with something. And so rentals was a fairly, I don't know, maybe it actually wasn't an obvious thing, but I think starting with rentals and then trying to validate, like, why is this a good idea? Why is this a bad idea? You know, who are the competitors? How are we differentiated from the competitors from like a, you know, a consumer standpoint? But you know, with Interviewed, because that was earlier stage, I think that that's probably more applicable. So at Interviewed, you know, we're selling hiring technology, and I think that it's very easy to get caught in the, like, who the hell do we go after with hiring technology? Everybody's hiring, at least they were in 2015. And so we had to artificially constrain the world. And so what that meant for us, I mean, there's a lot of ways to constrain. I think it makes a lot of sense to constrain by vertical. And there's a lot of reasons for this, but like in a marketplace, like a vertically specific marketplace, you know, there's a lot of companies like Shift that are doing an amazing job just helping, you know, veterans go out and find jobs. There's amazing companies like Cluster that are just going out and helping industrial engineers get jobs in defense and aerospace. And so you can constrain both sides of that marketplace, where you can say, we're, you know, HackerRank, we're only going to help engineers with the following skill sets or the following backgrounds get jobs at tech companies. And then there's other constraints that you can put, which is obviously like, you know, geographic constraints. We're only going to help engineers with these skill sets get these types of jobs in New York. And now all of a sudden it's like the opportunities start to actually manifest, because you also, ideally with a marketplace, you're trying to find people on both sides who go and talk to their friends. And so the challenge with a company, you know, if you look at an Indeed from a hiring standpoint, Indeed is phenomenal at getting a lot of people jobs who don't use LinkedIn. And so Indeed crushes it, right? Hundreds of millions of dollars from truck drivers, primarily in the US and Europe. Hundreds of millions of dollars in placing nurses and medical technicians. These people aren't like DMing doctors to get their jobs at hospitals, right? And so it's very easy to look at those businesses and go, holy shit, like how do we start? So at Interviewed, we just created artificial constraints. We were like, we want to get very good at customer support. And once we get good at customer support, we can move on to other stuff. In terms of where to go, I mean, I think that there's, you know, many ways that this can go, but I think the market can often pull you into other opportunities. And so for us at Interviewed, it was a pull. It was, we got really good at customer support over the first, you know, year and a half. And then we started having customers of ours, like Dropbox said, hey, we're actually doing a little bit more sales hiring than we're doing customer support hiring. Could you help us hire sales? And so going after and prioritizing customers based on, for us, it was three things. How much are they willing to pay us to enter a new vertical or to try a new thing? Can we use their logo? And are we going to actually learn something from this? And can we apply that learning elsewhere? So we ended up calling this the 3 L's, which was logos, learning, and lettuce. Lettuce is like getting paid. And we would only settle for 2 out of the 3, right? So it's like with Dropbox, they actually weren't going to pay us a ton of money to help with sales hiring. They were like literally the first customer that ever brought this up. But I told Ron, who was their head of talent, I said, if we can use your logo and if we can go tell every other company in New York and San Francisco that like Dropbox is using this for sales hiring, I will do this deal for, you know, $500 a month, unlimited sales hiring. And that worked out, you know, really, really well, because we ended up getting much bigger companies. We're like, shit, like I want sales reps, like whatever Dropbox is doing, just give me that. And so, I mean, always make sure when you're entering a new vertical, that there's some takeaway. I think too often founders are just chasing one of those 3 things. And often it ends up being money. And the problem with that is like, it's very easy in a marketplace to end up in verticals or to end up in things or with opportunities that are just kind of like dead ends. And so, or you end up running 2 different businesses, which is super common as well. And what I mean by 2 different businesses is, for us, and maybe this is wrong, but for us at the time, there was this like very logical jump from helping mostly technology companies is kind of how we had like boiled that ocean to begin with, and financial companies like Fidelity, helping them hire customer service people, to sales, because there were a lot of commonalities. Now, if Raytheon out of the blue or Boeing out of the blue was like, oh, you guys do this for customer support, could you help us hire like aerospace engineers? that's like starting an entirely new business. And I've seen many, many, many marketplaces, many, many companies do this in hiring and in real estate, where it's just like, jumping from the US to Brazil too soon is a massive mistake, because you're starting a separate business. Like there are no commonalities when you like export the knowledge of shopping for homes in the United States to the UK or to Brazil or India or whatever. And so I think going international too soon is almost always a miss. I mean, Zillow, as an example, is a $20 billion market cap company, and they only operate in the United States, and also only operate in a handful of markets within the United States. So if your market is big enough, you should actually be, I think we actually moved to sales too soon at Interviewed. I think that there's probably a multi-$100 million opportunity just nailing customer support hiring. And we could have stayed there for, 5-10 years if we wanted to run the business like that. I mean, if you look at like the total number of engineers in the US compared to a lot of other roles, it's not that massive. And in terms of the count, and there are literally a dozen of companies like HackerRank and Caliber and like all of these different companies that are in the space. And many of these companies are doing 30, 40, $50 million a year in revenue. And so if you go build Indeed for truck drivers, Indeed for nurses, Indeed for like a single role, or Indeed for, Chicago, like I think that's going geographically specific is interesting, because then on the consumer side, you get these kind of like viral loops of everybody in Chicago is finding their job through this new site, or renting their place through this new site, or buying, sneakers through this new site, whatever the thing is.
Awesome.
That's super helpful. I really appreciate it.
Cool.
Yeah, I love it. That was a great point as far as running two different businesses. So cool. Hey, Juan, did you want to come on?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Chris, thanks for this. Definitely appreciate that. I know one exit is difficult enough. It's just kind of winning the lotto, but you had 3 exits, right? So congrats again. And what's that formula? It seems like you've got it down to a T. And any advice to any startups wanting to launch a startup and then eventually selling their company to a bigger company? So
yeah, I mean, I think my sense is a lot of this is, I always start with the question, what do you want? Because it ends up being very different for different people. And so, the problem with, look, like I love bootstrap businesses. I advise several of them. Several of them are clients of ours now at Lasky. I'm also, a limited partner at Combinator. I work with, 7 other funds. And so it's like, I get the VC thing, I get bootstrapping, I get things in between. And ultimately both sides end up like shitting on each other a lot over like very dumb things. And so I think like the success formula is like, what is it that you want? And there are like right answers on both sides, and there are probably bad answers on both sides. And for me, like being very frank, I don't love running huge complex teams. Like our organization, the biggest team that I've ever led was my last role when I was at Indeed, was running enterprise product. The enterprise team is 3,000 people. The product and engineering component of that is like 1,500 people. Like this is a shit show every single day. And you get compensated well for running a shit show a lot of times, but like it's completely not fun. I am much happier making like basically no money, just running my own thing. And so, I mean, that's part of it, which is like, in your future mind, are you running a massive thing, or is it a small thing that prints a lot of money? One example that I give is that I won't name the company in case there's people that know this company, but if you do, you can DM me after. In the hiring space, there's a company that Interviewed, raised about $1.9 million. We got to several $1 million in revenue. We got very profitable with a very small team, and then we had an outcome that made everybody on the team who was early 7 or 8 figures personally. We had a competitor that ran a business for about 20 years in the space, had raised hundreds of millions of dollars, and he was the CEO and founding CEO of this company. And when he exited for $400 million, which is like 5x more than I sold my company for, he walked away with like $4 million after 20 years. So there's no right or wrong answer. Like, is it awesome to sell a $400 million company versus an $80 million company? Yeah, like on the surface, if you own 100% of it, it's way better. But often it's a mix of like, how diluted are you? What outcome do you want? And so for me and for us, it was, I think with all of these businesses, and I talk about this a lot on Twitter, is like, there's an amazing path that I think is right for me to like growing businesses and scaling them and then exiting them for, 20 to $100 million. That's fucking hard, but like you can actually do that somewhat repeatably if that is your goal in mind. And so the difference there is that if you have to know that almost like every day and think about it every day going in, because the things that get you to a $20 million exit or a $50 million exit or $200 million exit often are very different than the things that get you to a Series A or a Series B or a Series C. And so there are things around like building like corporate development partnerships and talks super early on. At Interviewed, I knew that like, I figured that like our industry was probably in like customer support hiring, getting really good at customer support hiring from a revenue perspective was like $100 million TAM. And so I figured let's capture as much of that in a sustainable way that we can, in like a profitable, scalable way, but we're going to need money to do that. Like I didn't want to bootstrap that business and I probably couldn't have afforded to bootstrap that business. And so there's always these middle grounds where it's like raise a shitload of venture capital or like only bootstrap. And so for us, it was like raise a couple $1 million, be able to hire the right team, but then use that couple million to get to profitability, build amazing relationships with Indeed and LinkedIn and like all of the potential buyers in our industry. Awesome. And then you're kind of, you're designing a way that you're providing value that like these big marketplace companies can't capture on their own. And that's if you want to, if you want to design your company for an exit, that is a very different strategy than like many of you who are, probably and hopefully and good for you, like, fuck that. Like, I want to go build like the biggest company in my category. And that's a very different process. Like in a lot of cases, you are actually an idiot to think about profitability. And you are like very stupid to think about like doing certain things that scale. And it's just like, it's a totally different business. And so I think it's kind of what you have in mind for your company. And I was happy to chat kind of offline one-on-one about it.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it.
Yep.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great question, Juan. So thanks for sharing more on that, Chris. So yep. Cool. So we're almost out of time here, but Chris, I did want to learn a little bit more about what you're working on right now, though, before we wrap it up.
Yeah. So Lasky is a company. This is very different from anything that I've ever done. It's completely self-funded. It's right now it's more of like a studio model where we're actually working on a couple things. They're all aligned under a broad thesis though of we are very obsessed with coaching and kind of fractionalized expertise. And so we have a couple different businesses. One is a company called Lunch Class that was actually just like a side project that we created a few weeks ago. It actually has quite a few customers now. And what we kept hearing from people was like, I hate like boring happy hour Zooms. And so we're bringing in like very interesting experts, people that kind of wrote the playbook within Amazon around great technical writing skills. And, you can, for usually like $20 per person, you can like book a Zoom meeting for your entire team with that person, and they'll teach you like public speaking skills or great technical writing skills or like some kind of interesting like knowledge bite. We have a brand right now that is focused really, like I said, on early stage sales and pricing and customer acquisition and growth and like whatever it takes to get to a couple $1 million in revenue. We are super interested in that, and so that's kind of the core business. We charge right now. We are like all about kind of getting data points, and then we're building like tools and automation on the back end here. So for $500 a month, companies that are early stage can get, you know, my expertise and a bunch of other like salespeople's expertise. And, you know, we can jump on Zoom calls and stuff. And then that scales up to several $1,000s per month at the time that you basically have like a small sales team and you want us to kind of help with onboarding and ongoing advisory type stuff and quotas and compensation. And so the ability to read really interesting content and then go and tap into expertise within that specific niche is kind of what we're thinking about deeply. And so we have a small team. I think that this is probably not a venture-backed business. This is just like an amazing thing that we've wanted to do. It's my early founding team from Interviewed. We've all worked together for a while, and this was just kind of something that we thought would make for a really nice business. And so, and then outside of that, we're also doing, I'd say more next year, but we'll start doing more like advisory and investment out of that holding company as well.
Nice. Well, we'll definitely, I'll share in the group because I know that I'm sure the Zooms are well worth it. So quite a few founders could use it. So, but cool. So this is incredibly insightful. Thanks for taking the time to chat with us. So where can we keep up with you? Time for a little plug.
Yeah. I'm pretty active on Twitter. Feel free to follow me on Twitter. Some of you probably already do. Chris J. Bakke is my Twitter handle. I can send it around afterwards too. And then feel free if you ever want to chat, especially like, I'd say I am best at anything related to sales, pricing, customer development and product market fit, fundraising, hiring. So kind of like most kind of broad, like non-technical growth and operations type things. I probably have like some experience in over the last 12 years, and I was happy to chat. So feel free to email me, Chris at Lasky, LASKIE.co, with any questions there too.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thanks again. This was great. I feel like we could go on for hours, but we definitely have a time limit and respect to time. So thanks again, Chris. I really appreciate it. And thanks everyone for joining in.